Welcome to the Humans of Hospitality podcast. I know so many of you listening to this show love your local bar, your local restaurant, maybe your local hotel, and have so many fond memories of time in hospitality businesses. This is the podcast where we get to chat to the human beings behind the scenes of that industry. Maybe the chefs or the bakers or the coffee roasters or the gin distillers or the craft brewers or the entrepreneurs, but all doing an amazing job of making sure that hospitality stays interesting and the big, dull, formulaic brands do not take over our high street. Please enjoy the show. In this week's podcast, we are chatting to the beautifully named Emma Goss-Custard. Now, for Emma, baking without flour came naturally to her as a student in the 1990s. She much preferred the luxurious texture and taste of cakes made from ground almonds and polenta, and she kept going even when well-meaning friends said her approach of replacing wheat with premium ingredients would never work. People wanted cheap cakes with a long shelf life, didn't they? Luckily, her friends were wrong, and in this conversation you'll hear how Emma managed to win over customers like John Lewis and Harvey Nichols very early on in her business career, and how 20 years on, her gluten-free bakery Honeybuns is still thriving even though the cake world has become amazingly competitive. You'll also learn how challenging it is to create dairy-free bakes that survive being jostled around in delivery vans, and how Emma has turned old farm buildings into arguably the prettiest office spaces in the UK. It's like walking into a fairyland with bunting and twinkly lights, and that's where you join us now in this week's conversation. Emma, thank you so much for meeting me and agreeing to do this podcast. Where on earth? I've just driven through some beautiful countryside to get here, and I'm sat in a wonderland. Can you just, tell me where we are and introduce yourself?
Yep, my name is Emma Goss-Custard, and we are based in Holwell, which is a little hamlet equidistant between Sturminster Newton and Sherborne. So we're in a very traditional, what was a really traditional dairy farming landscape.
And it's not traditional anymore, is it? I'm trying to describe what we're in. You say this was a chicken shed, and now it looks like a sort of Alice in Wonderland. There's bunting up, there's a log burner burning. This is a beautiful little spot. I feel like I'm in a film set, but where are we? People do scratch their heads a wee bit when they come in here. It's we're in the bee shack, and as you just said, it was renovated by our great friend Nick, who actually used to farm here back in the day, and he helped us to renovate it into what is now quite a hard-working little building. So it's the team hangout place, so their restroom, and we've also got an open plan kitchen where a lot of the recipe development happens, and the cakes then get slung over the counter for the team to eat and give us direct feedback on. And once a month it also opens as a pop-up shop. Amazing. Okay, so the public can come in and see it and sit in this. So I thought it was a rocking chair when I started, but I'm in a beautiful old wooden chair, sat by a wood burner in the middle of the English countryside. There's daffodils on the table because we're just coming into spring. So yeah, there is no greater privilege. But when I'm not living some sort of fantasy in this room, what else happens here? This is your heart of your operations. Is it baking?
Yeah, I think the heart of the operation, the kitchen table I actually started the whole enterprise on, is right there. To our left, and this is where all of the thinking and the reading and the dreaming really and the creating goes on. But the actual functional bakery is about 150 yards away across the farmyard, and that's in an original stone barn building which would have housed the cows when this was a dairy farm.
Okay, so now it's purely for baking and the cakes and all the stuff that you do. There's no farming per se going on here anymore, presumably.
No proper farming.
No. Yeah, you're the next end. So you were sort of an accidental pioneer, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the detail of what you do and how particularly your kind of style of cakes is now so in vogue. But can you just take me back? How did you end up in baking? What's your first memories of baking, and just explain a little bit how this business came to be?
Yeah, I think looking back on it now, I think that the influence of my mum was really quite intense. We lived in an old vicarage, which was very rambling and very cold, and the only warm room in the house constantly was the kitchen because there was an old, shonky old Aga in there.
Where was this?
That was up in North Lincolnshire in a little village called Humberston. And my mum was untrained, but a really good cook. I guess she had to be because there were 4 of us children she had to feed. And I've realised recently just how much I was influenced by watching her. She had a Kenwood mixer. She was always baking. We were required to not stick our fingers in anything and keep a safe distance away. It wasn't one of those idyllic helping your mum on a baking stool kind of
Torture.
Scenarios. Yeah.
Like watching only. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, strictly hands off. But that made a big impression, I think, and those lovely smells and being able to eat the results if you fend your brothers off, for the race to the cake tin. And I also remember having a bit of a disastrous foray into trying to bake a cake for my mum. I thought I'd have a go. She wasn't around. It was her birthday. I must have been 7 or 8 at the time. And I had a go at making what I thought would be a really delicious chocolate sponge cake and took it out of the Aga, which was pretty unreliable, to be fair. And it was raw inside. So
I like the fact you're blaming the Aga already, straight in.
Yeah, nothing to do with my lack of competence there. Yeah. And I made this concoction of bread, water and margarine.
Ooh, lovely.
It's probably Echo, something really,
yeah.
Made a paste up, stuck it in the raw centre of the cake and then presented it to my mum, who very charmingly
was she polite?
It.
Oh, she was. Yeah, just checking. I was like, after she made you watch cake, I was just going to give you some really frank feedback. That could have been the end there, couldn't it?
Could have been the end, yeah. So I did stick to savoury cooking for a while after that. And then, bounced back to cakes. But I think on both sides, again, it's with retrospect, but both my grandmas also were very, very keen bakers and, again, self-taught, but just into old-fashioned hospitality. The kitchen door was always open. The kettle was always on. It's probably a northern thing as well. Yeah.
That sounds amazing. Yeah. Okay. So you've got an interest. Then what happens? I think was it off to uni. How did this transpire into being an actual business, I suppose, or even an idea?
Went to uni, studied English, another great love, English literature, and had nothing to do with catering, but had always baked on the side. And it got to be quite a handy bartering chip because I couldn't type. And it was just the point where computerisation was starting to be on that old, being phased in. And my essays needed typing up on a computer. And I didn't want to have to learn to do that if I could avoid it. So I baked lemon cakes, which were my kind of signature thing, ground almonds and polenta rather than flour. And I would exchange them for getting the essays typed up. And there was a lady down the road in North London, I was at university as an undergrad in London, who very charmingly again went with it and accepted the cakes as payment.
Is there a certain ratio of sort of cake to typing? Is it done by the page or just by the document? Is it
I think page per slice.
Yeah, page per
like
slice. Nice. Yeah. Okay. Amazing. And you mentioned then straight away, and I've got to ask. So almonds and polenta, was that the normal thing that people were baking with at that point? And where did that come from?
Do you know? I think that one of the things I must have picked up would have been Elizabeth David and her influence, and definitely that Mediterranean vibe of the ground, indigenous, whatever's growing around at that time. They're not great wheat farmers in northern Italy, but they do use an awful lot of ground nuts, which are hanging around, literally, pistachio, ground walnut, ground almond, and polenta being a brilliant blender inner with the nuts. And Elizabeth David was a forerunner of bringing that over to the UK.
Who was Elizabeth? Sorry?
Elizabeth David, just a fantastic food writer, kind of like the doyenne, ahead of her time, brought over Mediterranean ingredients like olive oil, things that we would have regarded as really quite exotic back in the day. I fell a little bit in love with, what she was doing, I guess.
Excellent. So how do you go then? Again, the next stage of the story, you're clearly entrepreneurial savvy because you're already delegating out the typing of your lectures. What happens next?
Hadn't thought of it like that. I've always thought of myself as a very reluctant and kind of atypical business person, because I'm not particularly driven by the commerciality of it necessarily. I appreciate that has to be there for it to be a sustainable enterprise, but I'm really, really interested in the more visceral stuff. And for me, that is making someone really happy, giving them something that they can't otherwise get, giving a little bit of real delight in the day. You know, if you're going to make something, even if it's something as humble as a lemon cake, make it really, really good. And then have that response from them, you know, direct feedback. That was the beauty of the embryonic business, if you like, getting that kind of face-to-face customer reaction and them looking genuinely surprised at this kind of amateurishly cling filmed wrap of lemon cake, and then they look amazed as they unwrap it and eat it, and it's like, wow, that's really, really good.
And why was it so good? Was this is the flavors, or what was special?
I think flavour, absolutely, 100%. Flavour, texture, the whole, I guess you'd say in the trade, the whole organoleptical experience, the smell of it, everything. And also, it was kind of easy to stand out as being good back in the 90s, which is when this all started. Because the food landscape, from what I remember of it, I can remember being really frustrated and thinking, this is more like the 70s. Nothing's happened between the 1970s and the 1990s. It's all kind of stagnated into this horrible extended shelf life. Price is dominant, i.e. we're going to buy it in really low. And so many people were telling me, good, well-intentioned people were saying, you're not going to make this work. People don't want stuff that if it's that good, they're not that bothered. And it's like, they've probably never been given the option.
That's true. I don't think most people you speak to, particularly in, I suppose, the entrepreneurial end, so, you know, people who've created their own business rather than working for the big brands, very rarely does anyone say, I started this because of the money. I started this to make cash. It's normally I started it because I wanted to make people happy, or because I had this accidental gift or opportunity presented itself. But it's normally about the product itself, I suppose, and the quality. And then there's always a few naysayers who say no, you've got to be thinking about the money. And I think it's a myth. I think it's not about the money. Do a really good job, make people really happy. The money will come. And obviously, you know, we need money to do all the stuff we do, but it's rarely the starting point. So at what point then when's that trigger where you go, you know what, I might actually try and make a living out of this?
I think fairly rapidly for me, because I struggled very much to get into the whole corporate scene. I felt that wasn't a good fit for me, and the feeling was mutual. Certainly.
What was there a particular job that made you realise that very quickly?
Oh gosh, I've always worked. Like when I was studying, I've always kind of had jobs, and I've gravitated towards food without realising that connection. So always wanted to roll my sleeves up and serve coffee, bake bread, make sandwiches. Humble stuff, but feeding people good stuff has always appealed, and being in that environment. And then contrast that with, I joined a temp agency during one of the holidays, and it was to be a vaguely corporate, by which I mean you have to wear, I don't know, a suit and meet and greet at the Barbican Centre.
Oh, wow.
And I just felt like an utter fish out of water. It made me feel really shaky inside. And one of my great pals, who I'm very close to today, she's a corporate lawyer, and she took me on a few little kind of journeys into her world. And she was trying to encourage me to do a law conversion course because, in her words, she said, I've got no idea what you're going to end up doing.
I don't think she would have foreseen you sat here in a fairyland, chatting to me about cakes, would she? That would have been unforeseeable. I used to run the Holmes Place Barbican, so that was my job once upon a time as well. So I know it well, and I always found it ironic that I'd be there, and I ran a health club, so people would be literally queuing to get into the gym at 5:30 in the morning in central London. And although I was working in central London and I did have to wear a suit and I did have to be there at a certain time, I thought it couldn't be much less of a corporate job. In the fact, fundamentally, this is a gym, it's a swimming pool, people do a bit of yoga and stuff like that. And I felt so false being in the centre of London and knowing that I was basically from the beach and the coast, and this was a transitionary step, watching the corporate lawyers and these people living their kind of crazy lives in central London. So thank goodness that now we're down here. So that puts you off the corporate world. What's the first foray into business? Did you open a bakery? Did you start straight away selling to other providers?
I've got a lot of time and thanks to my first employer in Oxford, who I did a teacher training PGCE at Hertford College after my undergraduate studies in London. And whilst I was teacher training, I again realised with a sinking feeling, I'm not going to be able to do this. It's not for me.
Is this a primary or secondary education?
It was for secondary. I loved the kids on a one-to-one basis. My crowd control
I share that.
was not great. But yeah, I loved the children, but I knew I'd be a dreadful secondary teacher. So after I was still baking, I had got a job at a place called Le Petit Pan, and my first employer was a Croatian refugee called Krasho, and he took a punt on me. I was still working, I was doing my studies, but then working the job at the same time, so 4 a.m. starts and stuff, and just loved it, just felt like coming home again. And I started baking some cakes on the side. He started buying them. He used to joke about, we'll see a lorry going past 1 a.m. with whatever your business is going to be called on the side. Because I was able to confide in him that I was not that happy on the course. I was really beating myself up about it. And he said, well, then don't do it. Then just start selling cakes. And I was like, yeah, but I can't do that. And he said, well, I've come from Croatia with nothing. And that was quite an eye-opener. So on the day that I finished my course, I bought an old post office bike, and I had the idea of making beautiful sandwiches, and the cakes were a sideline. And I was really inspired. There's so many amazing people who were just emerging at that time. And one of the guy, he won't know who I am at all, but he's called Dan Chickentance. I hope he's still around. He might hear this, but he was making amazing bread, bagels, ciabatta, sourdough, rye breads, beautifully. From what I'd read of him, he'd come over from New York, and he was Polish by descent, and he'd started a bakery in Oxford. And I was really impressed. And I bought the bread. I used to cycle over to the bakery, pick up the bread, roast my own chickens in a shared student digs, completely under the EHO radar, and made gourmet sandwiches, which were a pain because I didn't have any refrigeration. So it was very just in time delivery, if you like, roasting them, putting them in bread, getting them out there safely, but it was enormously stressful. And the cakes were a much more sustainable bet, if you like. They didn't need to be refrigerated. That's how it all began.
So who were you selling those to? Directly to...
I was really dumb at the beginning. I was really, not at all commercially savvy. So I was doing 120, 130 miles a week on my bike.
Wow.
And cycling around the unglamorous bits of Oxford, which are, for those who know, the Ring Road area, and pedalling around and asking people on industrial estates who were brilliant, what would you like for lunch today? And they would give me their lunch order, and I would cycle home. This is pre-fax machine.
Wow.
And make their orders and then go back and deliver.
On the day?
On the day.
Wow, brilliant.
On the
That's
day.
Amazing.
And I would spend the night then baking the cakes, which would accompany the sandwiches to go out. It was incredibly hard work, but I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
So how many people a day-ish would you be making lunch for at that time then?
Gosh, I guess on a good day, it would be, say, 30.
Yeah.
And the trick was to try and get multiple orders from the same workplace. So the double glazing guys were really good to me.
Brilliant.
And then there was an insurance office. They were really good fun. I think they could see I was busting a gut to get this done.
Respecting your graft.
Yeah, it was a real hard graft. It really was. It taught me an awful lot. And then there was the inevitable light bulb moment. This is daft. I need to be focusing on one or the other. I can't drive. So therefore, a refrigerated van is out of the question. And therefore, the bike beckoned, cakes beckoned. And I also decided then that I needed to be approaching people like my old boss, Crecho at Le Petit Pain, and other delis and sandwich shops where it was a more efficient.
Makes perfect sense. So rather than selling directly to consumer, I did a podcast, hasn't gone out yet, with Ollie from Lunch. He will love this story because he has a business which delivers lunches to corporate offices, and he's been through a similar trajectory. He probably cut out a few stages of that, recognising that he needed to try and get offices to order a certain minimum. But yeah, he's super busy trying to launch that market. So it's nice to know that somebody started it right at that tiny scale. But he also started in a flat, and didn't tell his landlady what he was doing. I think at one point he was making something like 300 lunches a day basically in his flat with a flatmate who was pulling his hair out. And then same with Rupert from Conquer Gin. I don't know if you know Conquer, but he's the same. He started distilling the gin, and he actually had the HMRC come round into a kitchen that he was renting, and the coordinates on the gin bottle are actually the location of that first flat. So the number of businesses that have started under the radar, or at the least just in somebody's kitchen, is phenomenal. So it's great. So that makes perfect sense. You progress, you start selling fundamentally wholesale. You're still cooking it in the kitchen. At what point do you decide, right, I'm going to get some premises, this is going to be my job? And how did that go?
By this time, I'd met my husband, and I was really, really happy in Oxford. Had 5 amazingly understanding housemates, 2 of whom were my brothers, so that did help. They had my back from the get-go.
And they got free cake, right?
They got free cake. Yeah. They got a lot of cake. And so my husband got a proper job. He moved to Guildford. I wanted to be with him, so I also wanted to keep the customers that I had. So I very quickly learnt to drive with an amazing lady called Mrs. Passmore, which is...
That's a great name. A bit like you being called Goss-Custard, that, isn't it?
Indeed,
hey, Mrs.
Yeah.
Passmore. Brilliant.
She was great. And she got me on my way. She knew that I was skint. It was a very, very hand-to-mouth existence. I had no cash. And I look back at that very fondly because literally it was such a seedling enterprise. And she knew it was a big deal for me to pass that driving test. She knew how important it was.
You burnt your boats, basically. It was, all in.
Yeah. And that enabled me to then could drive back from Guildford to Oxford and maintain that round of trade customers who I delivered to twice a week, as well as then building up customers in Guildford. This was all done from my husband's very small terrace house kitchen, and a tiny, tiny kitchen. And then things started to just explode within the house. There were cakes everywhere. There were cakes in the living room, on the bookshelf, perched on the backs of sofas, just everywhere. And I had a really understanding EHO visit. And she said, it's kind of doable for a while, but this is suboptimal.
Suboptimal, that's a great word. Yeah. Okay.
So I kind of knew something was going to have to give. Yeah. And then the pivotal point was I'd rather cheekily, precociously posted a tray of brownie to a upstart chain of coffee shops who sadly no longer around. They were called the Good Bean coffee chain. And I got a telling off from the PA. The director was on holiday, and I got a phone call from the PA saying, don't ever do that again. They were unsolicited, and we have a policy of not accepting samples. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I thought it would be worth a punt. I didn't know. And then the director, a week later, when she returned from holiday, phoned me and said, "These are amazing. When can we have a meeting?"
So who turns down free cakes coming in the post? What possible policy can you have? Don't send me lovely cakes, please. I don't have that policy. If you ever feel the need to send any more, by the way, that's fine. Yeah, we accept all gifts in the post if anybody's listening.
Yeah, it was an odd one. Maybe maybe brownies weren't her
having a bad
thing.
day.
Yeah.
She really hated the brownie. Okay, so luckily a more amenable director.
So, yeah, and that was really one of those things that you dream of when it's a tabletop enterprise and you think, all I need is this first break. And yeah, it went really, really well. Too well, because we didn't have the capacity.
You ran out of sofa space to balance cakes on.
Yeah, the sofas were, full. So it was a very unstructured, again, quite a gut instinct idea. I kept driving past this little industrial estate, but it was a cute one. It wasn't overbearingly industrial. And I found an old recording studio, which we converted into the bakery. And that was all very hand-to-mouth existence in terms of not a lot of strategic thinking going on there, but thinking, blimey, we need to get these orders fulfilled quickly. We need more space and we need kit and we need people. And that just kind of exploded, really.
Oh, quick time frame. So you needed to learn fast, because once you start employing people, then all of a sudden it's not just a responsibility for you, it's their lives and stuff. So that must have been a steep learning curve, I presume.
Yeah, vertical, yeah.
Okay. Went well, clearly.
Yeah, in some regards it did. I say thank you to those people who helped me at the beginning, and I kind of cringe now looking back in terms of just how much they did for me, and I hope that I recognised that properly at the time. But I think in a way, if I've got any regrets, it's that I kind of think that when you're at that stage of survival and there's no spare capacity to think, let alone philosophize or reflect, you kind of draw all of the oxygen in to your project. And I kind of do look back a little bit and think, oh, it was quite takey in terms of getting people to do the things I needed them to do. Yeah. They were always paid and treated respectfully, but I don't think I necessarily appreciated just how much people were doing above and beyond.
Yeah, and likewise, to be fair, having now been, kind of self-employed for a number of years, I would say the flip side is a lot of people probably had no idea of kind of the amount of stuff that you were also going through and the plates that you're spinning. So it's a two-way thing, I think, isn't it? And I don't think we can beat ourselves up about that. No, we're all winging it fundamentally, aren't we? We're all learning every day. We're all doing the best we can do. And I think if you're deep down, you're a good human, you're making the best decisions you can make at the time. And people are pretty understanding and forgiving, I think. And also, I think we have this kind of like, good on you for having the balls to do it kind of attitude, because not everybody does. So it sounded like reasonably early on you started then to get the likes of, John Lewis and Harvey Nichols. So how do you go from you've got a sofa and then all of a sudden, how do you get these brands interested in what you're doing? And was that a transformational point or not?
Yeah, and again, looking back, I just didn't have time or the inclination to worry about knocking on doors. It was just like I just had a drive to knock on the very best of doors. And why not? Because I just absolutely 110% believed in the product, believed in our team, in our very small little team who were working their socks off for me to get this stuff done to a really exacting standard. And it needed to be shown to the best buyers in the land. So it was a case of just phoning them up or phoning the receptionist and finding out who the food and drink buyer was. And it was very straightforward. Whether it would be now, I don't know.
I'm fairly confident it isn't. Before everybody gets on the phone and just says, "Hello, reception of John Lewis. I'm just going to send you some cake." I guess I don't know why, but maybe whether there's more producers. But from what I hear, and I've interviewed Jimmy from Jimmy's Iced Coffee, and he talks about trying to get in front of buyers and how to do that. I mean, he's had to dress up as a complete sort of carton of juice and go and stand outside their offices until they come out. So yeah, maybe it's because it's Jimmy and he's bonkers. But yeah, I think it's got mildly more difficult. But you literally called them and they said, "What? Come in. We'd love to try your cake."
Yeah, there was a really inspiring buyer at John Lewis called Monique Borst, who is French, and she still works within the industry. And she said, "It sounds delightful. I'm really intrigued. How would you describe them?" And I said, "They're just really honest, homemade cakes that you can't buy in shops. It's not rocket science. They've just been made beautifully, and I want you to try them." And that was my big thing. Again, just cling film wrapped. They weren't professionally presented in a little basket. I went in on the tube from Guildford, a bit of a country bumpkin, I suppose. But she gave me the time. And so did another, again, really formidable lady at Harvey Nichols called Sue Cloak. She gave me that opportunity to pitch and said, "I really like what you're doing." So it's really refreshing.
How on earth do you convince them you've arrived with a basket and some cling film and a piece of cake? And I would probably think that one piece of cake was delicious. How the hell are you then going to make, I don't know how many they needed to order. What do? They presumably order more than 2 at a time. It's not just for their lunch by this point, I guess. So how do you instill in them the confidence that you can deliver commercially at that level?
I think what you've said about winging it, there's probably quite. I think that's probably quite pertinent. I think it was definitely a balance between, because we've always portrayed ourselves as honest. Hopefully we would be judged to have integrity. We've been going quite a long time now. We've got some very long-standing contacts within the industry. And at the same time, you don't say, "Oh, I'm not sure whether I can deliver on that." If you're being given opportunity, particularly with the recklessness and arrogance and ambition of youth, I think you just crack on and make it happen.
Yeah.
Really.
You're right, there is that fine balance between wanting it to be a kind of an artisan or a boutique kind of style product, but also going, no, of course, however many you need, we'll supply them. And so how many was their first order? Do you remember?
John Lewis would have been sizable, and a kind of like, oh, right, okay.
Enough to make you perspire slightly, at least.
Yeah.
Because your eyes cool.
Certainly to glow.
Okay, to glow. Not quite perspiration.
Yeah.
Are you a very chilled out human being? You come across, or you've just been worn down over the years?
Yeah, that's probably the last one.
It sounds, like super relaxed. I love it. It's a basket. It's a cake. You like the cake. You bought some cake.
It was pretty straightforward, but I do think you're right. I think that was very much of its time. And I think by virtue of being an uncrowded marketplace, we were presenting something that was utterly unique because of this accidental foray into gluten-free, which was a novelty. Even if people didn't know quite what that meant, it was still a USP, if you like. And I think they must have seen that passion for flavour. I didn't go on about pricing. I still don't. It really doesn't interest me. It is what it is. Maybe that came across, but I do accept that now it's a ferociously competitive marketplace, and rightly it's been democratised and standards have risen, and you have to shout more loudly to get an audience.
So perfect segue into the product itself then. So that's what I was excited to chat about, this almost accidental kind of use of gluten-free. So what was different about the product? And a lot of people won't understand how you bake without gluten. I'm lucky I've got a few bakers in the same, they use the kind of, the almonds and stuff like that. But can you just explain, what was so different about the product and why were you doing that, not deliberately trying to be gluten-free?
So we were inspired, or I was inspired back in the day by Italian. I keep going back really to that. It's that blend of stuff that is naturally growing around you that tastes delicious and doesn't have wheat flour in it. So I would gravitate towards, for example, if I was baking a chocolate cake for a friend, I would want to be making that really luxe and different to something that you could buy I'm going back now to the mid 90s. You couldn't get hold of that stuff, maybe in a really specialised London deli boutique bakery, but they would have been very rare and highly specialised. And
why was that?
I think probably because we weren't as global in our outlook, and that things were still regarded as a little bit funny. I remember my mum growing up and getting dried spaghetti in was a really big deal. That was seen as, what's that? My dad wouldn't eat it. So I think also that you had a lot of now, by virtue of social media and stuff, you can travel. I do travel a lot around the UK. I love it, finding out what different food cultures there are. And those kind of north-south, provincial, city barriers, I think, have very much diminished. People are more up for experimenting, but back in the day, not so much. I don't think there was that much opportunity. There wasn't the spare cash, for one. So being able to get creative, use what I deem to be superior ingredients like the ground almonds and polenta, which gave a beautifully luxurious baked finished cake, I just thought was better than using wheat flour. This is probably heresy for many people to hear, but I'm not talking about bread and things where obviously flour's got a place and is delicious, but when you're thinking about high-end cakes, I'm a massive advocate of using ground seeds, ground nuts, polenta, sorghum flour, other alternatives. I just think you get a superior flavour and texture.
And also presumably better for you in the fact you're getting back to the kind of the whole food ingredient and some of the nutritional composite. Not that I'm trying to say that we should all just live on cake, but is there a nutritional aspect to it?
I'd be hugely cautious I'm really, really cautious of making any health claims at all. It gets into really tricky water. We make delicious cake. Hopefully as many people as possible can eat it. We've got a really super loyal celiac following for obvious reasons, because we don't have any gluten on the premises. We exclude all of that, so they've got an assured safe supply. But beyond that, I think there's a lot of trickery, whether that's conscious or not, around the whole health halo of gluten-free. I think we've got to be really, really careful about that. And it's a real pain for celiacs to have to exclude these foods. It's not a lifestyle choice for them. And why would you, unless you really had to for medical reason, why would you want to exclude anything and narrow down your variety?
So the difference. So you've now got, I suppose, the recognition of celiac, and it's easier to spot it, and we're more aware of it. So there's clearly a definite need for gluten-free for the celiac community. Where do you think the rest of the kind of the desire, the growth in gluten? Like you say, you didn't do it for gluten-free; you were doing it for different reasons. But it's presumably been quite beneficial now that there is this kind of growth of desire for gluten-free. Where do you think that comes from? And in a minute then I'd like to take that into the next stage with vegan and dairy, but I'll start with gluten.
I think if there is a health halo effect undoubtedly around gluten-free, and people may well feel better without eating gluten, and they may not appear as a celiac. They may not present medically as a celiac, but there's an awful lot more instances now of gluten sensitivity whereby that person may not be a full-blown celiac. They may not be recognised by the conventional medical diagnosis as being a celiac. So I think that has developed, that understanding that there is more of a spectrum. And like I say, I'm not trying to judge anybody for their dietary requirements or what they want to do. I'm just noting a slight note of caution that I think it would be wrong to purport that eating gluten-free stuff is healthier. then
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think you're right, and that would be coincidental. The sort of using ground almonds rather than wheat flour, because I follow a predominantly whole food plant based diet and got very much into the nuts and the pulses and kind of where you could replacing whatever is commonly being used, sugar, replacing it with dates and stuff like that, and just trying to get back to that whole food. But you end up accidentally because of your kind of obsession of quality and decadence, and with a really good product that then fits that niche. Presumably it was the other way around with vegan and dairy. Presumably that was more consumer demand. I guessing you weren't kind of going, I want to make this cake vegan or dairy free because it's going to make it better. Did you notice there was a demand for it? And when actually I think we can, let's do some experimentation. How did you get into that side of it? Because my understanding is you went through a few kind of tries on that before you were happy with the quality of the product that you produced. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, it's right. I think as much as anything, it was a technical challenge, really. It was really quite interesting from a baker's perspective in a geeky kind of way, how many conventional rules could we break, if you like, and what could we come up with. So it was just an interesting project for its own sake. But most importantly, it was customers, and we've worked super closely with celiac groups in the UK, particularly our Bournemouth branch, actually. And there was a very lovely lady there who we did a lot of work with 12 years ago. She was the secretary of that particular branch, and we used to host visits for them, get their feedback on products, and they were telling us that there was, and this is borne out by the evidence today, that there's quite a high correlation between celiacs and those celiacs who also then have a dairy intolerance or even an allergy, so that we could then help them to further by not just giving them a gluten-free option, by giving them a dairy-free option as well. And that's how the first iterations of our dairy-free products came about. And that would have been as long ago as 10, 12 years ago, but they didn't have mass appeal. So one of them we were making, and I'd actually be quite tempted to kind of revive it, because we made it using olive oil and, again, our go-to polenta. It wasn't vegan, it did have eggs in it. We used a bespoke dairy-free chocolate, which at the time was really hard to find. And we flavoured the topping with fresh mint that we grew here. It was quite innovative, really. A bit like a posh after-eight cake. In a
Sounds
way.
good.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was not bad, but it commercially it was a failure, as many of our ventures have proven to be. But it was really, really good fun developing it.
It's annoying when the consumer doesn't buy the stuff that you want,
so
isn't
annoying.
it? We've had to compromise so many times and sell what the consumer wants to buy rather than what we want to sell. It's always disappointing, but I'm sure it was lovely.
But yeah, no, absolutely right. And off the back of that, we created a cookie, which because we'd done, and we find this often happens, that you kind of create something that doesn't work, but you've learned a lot of useful lessons along the way, and it's like, right, okay, maybe this would be more commercially minded, and off the back of the initial project you may kind of springboard onto something else. So we devised something that was called the almondy cookie. We sold shed loads of it, and it happened to be dairy-free and gluten-free. So that kind of got us on the road, but the whole vegan piece really came about, and it's been a very delicate line to tread, bearing in mind we're in the butter dish of Dorset and the Blackmore Vale. And we love butter, and it's in a lot of our products. At the same time, we were doing a lot of work with Compassion in World Farming, and a lot of our younger customers in the main on university campuses were telling us that they were getting increasingly interested in veganism. And we listen to our customers, and the other vocal group were the triathletes and endurance runners, who were increasingly getting into the whole vegan piece as well. So yeah, we had it coming from all angles, really.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. Particularly the health aspect. I was with a lady called Mel from Wonderfuel, who literally especially goes around to all the endurance events and specialises in how do you feed athletes for long distance runs and stuff like that. So I remember the first time I heard about endurance runners who were running things I'd never even heard of, 120, 130 mile marathons and stuff like that, and then you find out they're doing it on a plant-based diet, and you're like, I can't run 5 miles on a cheeseburger. How do you run 100 miles on a salad? How is this even possible? So yeah, I think it's fascinating. So it took a few incarnations, but now, replacement for eggs, what do you do? Using, chia seeds, is it, and stuff like that? How are you making your cakes? And have you got to the point now where there isn't a compromise, or are they just different?
Some and some, I think. There are undoubtedly products that are pretty straightforward, whereby you've not got egg in the original. So stuff like granola bars and flapjacks and things are pretty straightforward. Brownies are also very easy. The frustration comes where you've got stuff. Chia seeds is a good example. If you're, not the chia seeds, I beg your pardon, the chickpea
the liquid that it's in,
that's brilliant, as is mashed banana, as is mashed avocado. And we've done a lot of really interesting stuff in the kitchen here, messing about with recipes. But the problem that you run into then is the commercial legs, because you've then got to look at shelf life. We freeze everything here, so we're not using any preservatives in the baked product, but the only way that we can then spin out to distribution hubs is to blast freeze and then ship it out frozen. And a lot of these things, which may look fabulous in a recipe book, on Instagram, what have you, they won't withstand that blast freeze process, then defrost it, and then still have a bit of a sensible shelf life at the other end. You've got boring stuff to contend with, like mold growth and all those kind of lab check requisites that you have to go through. So now, what can I say without giving? We use, instead of egg, interestingly, we use a lot of coconut milk and coconut cream that we then whip up, that gives a really good consistency. We haven't got... It's really difficult to get gluten-free and vegan to come together in certain products. And to make a vegan gluten-free sponge that can then go through those processes that I've just got, like the freezing and being knocked about in the back of a wagon on a pallet, all that kind of stuff, is pretty challenging. And we're not happy with what we've come up with so far in the sponge cake thing. We thought we'd got it, but it's not quite good enough.
Good. And I love you. I can imagine the standards that you've got is because of why you started this, and it was all about quality, and it was about taste, and it was about flavour, not about fulfilling people's dietary requirements. I suppose I love the fact that you don't compromise, basically. So you're not going to sell something out that's substandard just because it happens to therefore be vegan and dairy free. For you, I think it comes to quality, taste, texture first, isn't it? And then everything else, which is great. I have a couple of bakers and they've loved the geeky learning. I think it's in bakers because baking is such a precise kind of process, I think, isn't it? And my bakers have loved learning about how to try and fulfill these dietary requirements as much as possible. And we don't have the luxury, I suppose, of being in a completely celiac kind of gluten-free environment, but they're learning so much more and really getting a buzz out of it, and then almost taking pleasure in not telling you till afterwards, or you try the brownie or you try the flapjack or the cake or whatever, and they go, it was gluten-free, it was dairy-free, it was this. How the hell is that possible? It tastes amazing. So I think we're all learning and enjoying that. So you're predominantly now then, you sell mainly to wholesale to other, is it cafes, is it shops, is it restaurants? I know you tried a little bit of online as well. What's your main market now?
Yeah, so we're B2B, which is basically selling to other businesses, and we do that. We sell to wholesalers primarily, so we don't run any vehicles ourselves, and it gets collected from here on what they call in the trade a frozen wagon or a cold wagon.
Even though you've got a license now, you're not out delivering anymore. They come to you. You should have done that day one. You would all those miles on the bicycle.
I did progress to a little Suzuki Caravan, and I have very fond memories of that, driving into London and stuff. But I think it was that step up to, again, it was another light bulb moment, if you like, of this is only going to work if we freeze it, because we're not going to put preservatives in it, and it's never going to have a long shelf life relative to other products, so other baked products in the category. So the freezing was brilliant but expensive, so it made much more sense to allow the guys who specialise in the transportation side to come to us. We have got a frozen storage facility that's off site, which makes it logistically easy to manage, and that's how it works. So basically our stuff will go, you might have big direct customers who can handle their own frozen storage, and you may be able to supply direct to them, albeit on one of these wagons, or we will be supplying a trade wholesaler, and they then spin it out to their distribution hubs, and then they will then in turn supply cafes, coffee shops, tourist attractions, museums, whatever it is.
Okay, so most of your stuff ends up then, I'm thinking when the consumer has it, obviously, it's not frozen, so you're not so much selling, it's not going to the supermarkets for take home, it's mainly cafes, bars, restaurants. And
yeah, we're not a retail. We've tried that, and it absolutely does not work for us. We're absolutely food service through and through, and we really, really like it that way.
Why? What was when you...
I think if you speak to, be careful what I say. I don't want to be, I don't want to be negative towards retail.
You were going, a little wince there. Go on.
But food service, it's such a friendly industry, and there's, I think it's fair to say, I think even the food service, the wholesalers themselves would admit that they've typically been a little bit behind the curve in terms of trends and what have you, and retail are the glamorous ones of the industry, and they're the trailblazers and get the new brands in and stuff, and that's really starting to change. Food service and the wholesalers working within that have really upped their game and have really embraced artisan, more interesting, independent brands over the last 3 to 4 years. It tends to be less cutthroat. It tends culturally to be, this is only my opinion, but it tends to be less aggressive. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. There's a lot of unglamorous aspects to it, which I actually really like, i.e. the logistics of getting stuff there and how that feeds back to the technical, as you were suggesting, the development of the product. Is it going to be able to withstand these certain processes, which are unglamorous, like being stored in a frozen warehouse, being handled multiple times before it ultimately finds its home and is sold on to the consumer, and is it going to be in pristine condition at that point? So I like all of those challenges.
So when it ends up in the it's in the coffee shops, the the retail places, the museums, the places you talk about, then is it branded as yours, or is this going in as individual kind of tray bakes and stuff like that? Do most people not realise they're eating your cakes fundamentally?
It's a mixture. It's probably 60% roughly branded, with the little bars with our label on, and 40% tray bakes. Even then, with the tray bakes, there's a degree of scope to be able to semi-brand it by putting a cake ID card by the side of the slices on a plate, if you like, with the Honeybuns name on. But most of the time, they don't get used. So, you would be relying on the goodwill of the retailer to say, oh, it's made by Honeybuns.
And you want them to say that, or don't mind? Are you?
We're really unprecious about it. You've got people who may want to promote it, but I'm really happy for them to pretend they've made it themselves.
Have you ever turned up anywhere and gone, I'm sure that's my cake? Or
yeah, lots of times.
Really?
And all sorts of places. When you're taking the kids to London for a trip out, and it's like, oh wow,
instantaneously, presumably.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So you've also made the decision, I was reading, that everything's in-house. So you get it to the point, so your social media, your marketing, your packaging design, is that right? Is it all here in this wonderful fairyland that I keep alluding to that I'm in?
Pretty much. We've got a very, very talented freelance designer who we work really closely with. And so she's not in-house, but she works a day a week for us, and we're really lucky to have found her. She's very, very good. Everything else pretty much is done by us. Yeah, we have to do things like send the product. We've got a technical person full-time who, again, is awesome, but she then liaises with an outside lab to verify products and stuff. So you're using expertise where you need to from outside, but the lion's share of it we do.
And how many people do you employ? Because you seem like you're somewhere very remote, but you've found some other humans to come and hang out with you in your wonderland.
We've got a happy little tribe and there is about 32 of us. It fluctuates a little bit between 30, 35, and some of those team are part-time, but that's roughly it.
Okay. nice. And then you still predominantly selling the kind of the original recipes, the original stuff you were doing, or have you needed to change it because of the style of business you do, or has food trends changed so much now that the stuff you were doing when you started is completely different, or are a lot of those original recipes and original bakes still in play?
A lot of them are still in play. I would say 50% are still very true to the original, if not completely unchanged. So the plain flapjack, which is a consistent bestseller, along with the milk chocolate brownie, never had any changes to the recipe, and that's 21 years ago. And then on the flip side of that, you've got, I think, really quite innovative stuff going on, which I never thought we would be doing. Say 4 years ago, entirely plant-based brownies and salted caramel brownies, you name it, and all completely 100% plant-based.
And talking about not foreseeing, so going back and hearing that story of you on the bike, kind of riding around Oxford, could you have imagined that this is where you would have ended up? Could you see it in your head? It sounded like reasonably early on you thought, you know what, corporate's not for me. This is what I'm going to do. Has it been a plan, or is this a happy accident?
In a very, again, kind of, I use the word uncommercial way. There was always a vision, there was always a dream, and it's been uncanny how it's been realised. And I think it's gone full circle in terms of this is recreating on some level, albeit subconsciously. I think I've recreated what we had back home as kids. We've still got the old table, for heaven's sake, where it all started.
That's
and, my brothers and I eating cake around that and watching my mum, or, hanging out with your mum and dad in the kitchen. And it's very much that vibe. That's what the team comment on. It's a very family, a very tight team feeling. And that, to me, is the main motivator. That's what I love the most.
You would have no idea, even finding you would be a complete challenge. But if you did find you, you would have no idea about the kind of, the size of business and the number of places that your cakes appear. And you're very humble, which is amazing. But I've forgotten to ask, how did you end up here in this farm? You were, last time we kind of touched on that, you were you'd gone out of Oxford. Where were you? Guildford, was it?
Gone to Guildford.
Yeah, so go on, what was the leap? I missed a bit.
Yeah, we were happily baking there and absolutely flooded out with orders. We'd just got a contract for Virgin Trains, which again was putting pressure on capacity. We had to half unbuild the entrance to the unit in the middle of the night to get a flow wrap machine in there because we realised we couldn't actually get it through the doors. Really nonsense stuff, really. And although it was a great unit, it was a great springboard, it always felt a bit of a square in a round peg kind of a situation. We didn't feel at one in that industrial environment. And my husband and I have always had a dream of buying an old funny farm when we were old and, get some animals and stuff. And then again, another light bulb moment. Why don't we just bring that forwards? And we were audacious. We borrowed an awful lot of money. We're quite creative in what we presented to the bank manager and got away with it by the skin of our teeth, really, and found Niche Farm, or it found us. It was, again, the early days of the internet property searching, and we had a desire to find an old ramshackle place we could do up ourselves. We wanted space for some rescue animals, and most importantly, we needed those redundant farm buildings, and we were really, really lucky to find it.
Right. And so how long ago was that?
That was 2002.
Okay, that you came here. Oh wow, a long time ago. Okay, and it's worked out clearly. So you now have a mishmash of different buildings doing different stuff, and it's worked. Does your husband work in the business? Or
he does now. Yeah, okay, it took him about 8 years to come around to the idea.
You beat him out of his corporate life. Come on.
Yeah, winkled him out of his suit.
What's his role?
He does all of the financials and
so
procurement.
Still quite grown up then.
Yeah, he's the grown up.
I'm looking around again, imagine him in a penny next to the daffodils, a bit of bacon, some brownies, but he's still still just a little bit corporate. So what you've created is quite inspirational, really, and the fact that you come across, and we've only known each other for an hour, but you seem. I feel very calm and very relaxed here. I'm going to feel very zen, and it can't be that way. There's no way that you can be supplying the amount of stuff you're supplying to the number of people you are. Surely, do you ever feel kind of overwhelmed? And how do you this thing that you've created? You've gone from a bicycle to kind of national deliveries. Do you feel overwhelmed, and how do you manage it? How do you stay so zen?
That's really sweet of you to say that. It's probably all an illusion. I think. Surrounding yourself, I keep coming back to the team, because that for me is when the team is working well, they're happy, we're all working on a project, common goal, there's no feeling like it. It gives me enormous satisfaction. That's where I find the purpose, and it's really good fun. We know who we can get the best out of, and I think that we've learnt that over a period of time. And my motto has always been to surround yourself with people who are considerably better than you are. And that really tells the tale, really. They are remarkable and extremely supportive. And they know that Matt and I work our socks off in terms of keeping this thing going. And they really respect that. And they help us make it happen.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I find it... humbling and exciting and reassuring, the number of people that I ask that question who come back to the fact that they do it for the team. And as a again, the misconception, I think, of entrepreneurs and of business is it's all about money, and people are trying to make money and they're trying to make themselves wealthy, and it's a them and us kind of situation. Yet so many people I know that employ people, you end up with this shared kind of sense of responsibility that their lives and their families' lives and their kids and their husbands and partners and wives, it's such an exciting opportunity to be able to create that kind of environment, to create jobs that people like, because there's some rubbish jobs in the world, isn't it? And if we're in a position as business owners and operators where we can create a nice environment where you're treated with respect and you can be a good employee and good employer and work together, it's amazing how many people share that. Very rarely do I just make a load of cash, Mark, and that's why I do it. So it's a nice thing, I think, about what we do, isn't it?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's if I really want to freak myself out, I'll go in the car park and look at everybody's cars and think, I better not cock this up.
Exactly. I counted the kids once that were, how many kids of my team, and I think we got to 32. There were 32 children that fundamentally we were providing for. And that was like, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up to realise. One, I was excited and I was really pleased because I like to think that we're a nice team and a nice bunch of people. But the sense of responsibility to think that there's 32 little kids out there who to get their dinner, we need to keep what we're doing and not fail. So it's a great motivator, I think, isn't it? And you must have seen, the competitive landscape. You talk about how hard you work, and presumably that's because there's, from what I've seen of business, it constantly pivots, and particularly, again, you kind of alluded to the last 3 or 4 years. Has it become much more competitive? And although you don't like selling based on price because it's about the product to you, have you had to compromise on that, or at least has been put under some pressure to do so with the competitive landscape?
Yeah, lots of pressure to move on price, but we genuinely haven't really got any place to go on that one because it by its nature, it's a labour-intensive product. People are paid a fair wage. We run the business sustainably. We're not creaming off a huge profit at the end of the day. So there isn't huge margin to play with. And I think certain buyers will regard that as just a very astute negotiating stance, but it truly isn't. It's like, this is how much it costs. Yeah. And but we've got amazing buyers who we've benefited again just from hanging on in there and building a reputation for not budging and never adulterating the recipe to reach a cost point. We just won't do that. So we get rejected on the basis of price all the time, but that's generally the only reason we get rejected, and I'm quite comfortable with that.
perfect. Yeah, no, never set out to be the cheapest, just the best. And then, so I'm sure people have this perception or misconception, I suppose, particularly in food sometimes, about how easy it is to come in and, I'm just going to make some, I'm a really good baker, I'm going to make some cakes, or, I like coffee, I'm going to open a coffee shop. And, there's not too many barriers to entry quite often in hospitality, but there's an incredibly high failure rate in hospitality businesses. So I go in and talk to schools sometime about, kind of trying to inspire the kids about everybody's winging it. So don't worry about the fact you don't know the answers and just do something. But do you ever hear particularly bad business advice being given where you go, oh my God, that's come from a theory or a book or an academic? Or on the flip side, do you ever hear any really good advice and you go, yes, that's the nugget, that's what you should remember?
That's really interesting. And I think that it's so individual. And I think it's acknowledging that there is no one right way to do it. That for me, I'm very much crash bang wallop, need to get my sleeves rolled up, visceral, don't overcog it, get stuck in and do it. Even if it's going to be an imperfect result to begin with, you're doing it, you're on the journey, you're cracking on and you're learning as you go. Awful lot of people would absolutely shudder at that and would want to plan it to the nth degree, be strategic, be more grown up, be polished, plan ahead, all that kind of stuff. And I think that represents the two extremes on the spectrum probably, and everything in between. And I think as long as you recognise that, I think draw your inspiration from where it feels right. So for me, it would be people like Anita Roddick. It'd even be Keith Flint, who very sadly passed last week, where he had passions like his motocross that he then turned into a commercially viable project. I just think that's so inspiring, and then him openly talking about his love of the team and his passion to drive him to do that stuff. That's the type of person I identify with. But, horses for courses.
Yeah, it's true. I think, I always say action beats intention. There's so many people who intend and they talk about doing it. But the flip side is, it's hard, isn't it? The failure rate is high, but we do learn as we go. I'm guilty of all too often doing the action, and not having fully planned it out and then trying to work it out and then going, actually, it was a bit of a shit idea. I probably should have listened more to the team. But it's bloody good fun, isn't it? It's bloody good fun starting stuff and then trying to work out what to do.
It's really good fun. I mean, like most of the stuff that we've come up with, or I've come up with, I have to own it has failed, But the pardon the pun, but the bread and butter, the kind of beating heart of the business it's unglamorous. It's selling pallets of lovely, lovely cake. But that is it. All of these other ingenious ideas that we've had over the years, I don't know, crikey, like savoury cakes and a little glamping offshoot and all these crazy creative things haven't actually made us any money. And, if you're looking at it conventionally, have been failures, if you like. But have they really? They've been massive fun. A lot. Yeah. You've learnt loads, and on the back of that, then you crack on, don't you?
Yeah, I always say it's not what you earn, it's what you learn. And, fail fast, learn fast. I love learning. I do prefer learning without the really expensive kind of mess ups. I was going to use a proper swear word then. But, and we've now probably simplified and contracted the business. And if I look back, I probably think, maybe I shouldn't have done that. It was a bit impulsive, but you don't know it unless you try, do you? But now I am simplifying stuff again, so good. Well, look, lovely to meet you. Where can people find out more about what you do? Can you remember your website address? Otherwise I will put it in the notes. But go on, try and get it right.
www.honeybuns.co.uk. It's
That's
all there.
pretty easy. It's pretty easy. And you're on social media and stuff like that as well?
Yeah, we're on Twitter, Facebook, all the usuals, and we've written a couple of cookbooks that people
I heard about that. Yeah. Are you giving away your trade secrets there, or what's the motivation for that?
Yeah, some. We figure that you've said it all really. Loads of people can make amazing cakes, and I'm pretty relaxed about that and the recipes and whatnot. If we can share them and inspire people, that's brilliant. But there's so much more to building the business than that. So I'm pretty chilled about sharing the recipes.
Good. Well, I'm gonna. My daughter, who is 10 in a couple of weeks' time, she is obsessed by baking. She bakes 3 or 4 times a week. Self-taught, because I'm not a baker, and a little bit too busy at the moment because we're in the process of building a restaurant for ridiculous reasons. But she gets out the YouTube videos. She plays that. She absolutely loves it. You talk about this kind of nature nurture thing, and I look at it and I'm in the trade, but it's not really coming from me apart from the fact that I've got bakers and she obviously knows we do it. She just absolutely loves it. So I wonder whether she'll end up following this trajectory, but I'm going to get the book and show it to her, and it'll be an inspiration. But thank you so much for taking the time. Good luck with what you do. I'm feeling calm and relaxed. I'm sure you're not. I'm sure it's harder from your side of the table, but this is a wonderful environment, and you make beautiful products, so congratulations. Thank you for sparing the time.
Thank you so much indeed.
Cheers. So there you have it. You have reached the end of another episode of the Humans of Hospitality podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please go and visit our website, humansofhospitality.co.uk, for the show notes and extra episodes and information. And whilst you're there, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter and to receive free materials all about the humans behind our incredible industry. Lastly, if you could subscribe, rate and review this podcast, you will be massively helping me out, and it would be hugely appreciated. Thank you so much. We'll be launching another podcast in just 7 days' time. Cheers.